finger, as it were, also in Luke chapter 4. Because Luke chapter 4's story has a little bit that's not in Matthew's concerning the temptation of Jesus. Initially, Shirley had left a message for me to do something about talking about Lent and all that traditional stuff that we carry out this time of the year. And the readings today, of course, included this one on the temptations of Jesus. And I looked at it and I thought, do I do this or do I do that? And intriguingly, the more I got into the story of the temptation, the more I saw these two things really fit together. And I think you'll understand why I'm saying that as I get further on. It's interesting watching the church. You know, I saw in a Live magazine, the latest edition, some expert on church growth is now making... People in the sociology field throw figures around. I must admit, I've become a complete cynic. You know, X percentage of people believe in having sex with elephants or something. I mean, you get where they get this stuff from. And now that I've worked at the social scientific level of doctoral level of research, I must admit I'm not a cynic about education. I'm not a cynic about hard work. I'm not a cynic about serious research. What I am a cynic about is the way in which people take these slices of society, do all forms of surveys. And when you start examining the foundation of their surveys, there is so much complicated stuff about how you really get a survey that's accurate. To ask what percentage of you are going to vote for the Labor Party in the next election, you probably can scientifically nut that one out pretty clearly. But the moment you start asking questions about things that have to do with the real substance of our lives, it depends how you ask the question. And when you give the possibility of A or B, or even if you give A, B, C and D as possible answers, it really becomes a bit like that sicko that we've got from the current President of the United States of America, who has been idiotic and brainless enough to say to the world, you're either on our side or you're on the terrorist side. Now, the moment I hear that, I feel deep hostility towards that kind of idiotic world leadership, because it is. It's totally insulting to one's intelligence and to one's soul, because I don't like America's way of handling things, and I don't believe in terrorism. And I know that if I really put in writing on the internet and spread what I really think about this, I don't even know if I'd get back to defend my dissertation, because one of the biggest victims from the September 11 deal was freedom of speech. And the second thing was true justice, because it seems almost for certain more innocent people have been deliberately killed by the United States bombing forays in Afghanistan amongst the poorest, defenseless people in the world than were killed in the September 11 attack. What morality do you make out of that? So I find myself back in the old days before the anti-Vietnam people actually became a big enough force to change the culture. I find myself in that little group now of people that really, in my heart of hearts, dissent. I find myself back in the Bible saying we have no continuing city, we seek one which is to come. I find myself alienated from Australian citizenship. I find myself alienated from the World Forum. And even I agree with the thing that's going through email at present. I have a great love for Bono, and we are sort of loosely friends. But when I see him sitting there at the World Forum with Bill Gates, talking about how we can lessen the debt, and I know that Gates gets his software made in Indonesia at $1.50 a day wage rate kind of thing. or $1.50 an hour. I think it's $1.50 a day or $2 a day or something. I think the system will buy anybody as an endorsement of a label, even the World Forum, which has no intention of changing the world shape. You say, Smithy, what are you waffling on about this for? Well, I'm saying this is the stuff when I come to the temptation of Jesus. I pick up all these comments, I was going to say that in a Live magazine they said this church growth expert that's into Let's Be Modern says that they expect, I can't remember what the date was, but they expect very soon that 50 million Americans will have totally abandoned any form of church in a traditional way to join internet church. Internet church is not church in any possible way that you could take from a biblical and historical framework. Now, I don't know where they pluck this stuff out of the air. 50 million people in the US go into internet church. It's a heck of a lot of people. And I think probably it's a crock of you-know-what. It's just one of these stabs. And if you ask a lot of people in a form, they might say, yeah, I'm thinking of quit church, I'll go to the internet. Whether they do or not is another question. It's all very messy. We come to Easter, and we find that Easter is a time where historically for 2,000 years the believers have narrowed down the focus. And it's not surprising, I guess you know that Lent started as a 40-day kind of period of special focus in the Christian church in about the year 400 AD. You might say, oh, that's a long time after Jesus. You could equally argue it's fairly close. You're not many generations of the church fathers, as they're called, and unfortunately there was an emphasis on the male thing there, so it's probably historically accurate but lamentable that I say church fathers. But it's not far from the patristics, if we want to get away from the terms that people will snag on. It's not far away from the time of the patristics that you have Christians observing 40 special days. For some, it was actually a 40-hour fast of some sort or another. 40-hour fast between Good Friday and Easter morn. Now, at that point, everyone starts going back over the figure 40. The flood. Moses in the wilderness for 40 years. Elijah's journey to Mount Horeb for 40 days. And Jesus being 40 days in the wilderness. That's 6 weeks. That's 6 weeks. That's a pretty tough time not to eat. Pretty rigorous test. And folks, there's a lot of stuff in the air at present that would indicate to us that God would have us luxuriate in the best possible conditions we can put together as the children of the King. When Jesus came to earth, he was not spared pain, he was not spared difficulty, he was not spared stress. And it's interesting that at least in one of the accounts of this in the Gospels, the Greek language indicates that Jesus is driven out into the wilderness by the Spirit. The experience of wilderness, the experience of negativity, which in this culture you must get rid of any analgesic way you possibly can. Take a pill, have sex, do whatever, but don't suffer, whatever you do. Suffering is the great sin in this culture. It's intriguing we come to Easter, which is a period where we talk about people inflicting, in a sense, suffering on themselves, giving up stuff they like for the Lenten period, doing without chocolates or sex or both. And for some people that wouldn't be a loss at all. But whatever. We come to a period that concentrates on self-denial to reach out to find God. Well, that shouldn't be surprising. Because at the end of the day, our obsession with ourselves, whether it's material things or anything else, is the greatest thing that stops us from finding God. You know, if God seems far away, guess who moved? We have that old saying on a poster. In actual fact, God's activity in our world and in our lives is not sort of going up and down with the stock exchange. It's our emotions. It's our personal positioning which does that. And in this story, Jesus retreats. But he doesn't just retreat as a nice spiritual exercise. He is driven by the Spirit of God into a period of suffering and fasting. Now, that doesn't sound very sensible, you'd think, in modern psychological terms. I mean, if you're going to come under heavy-duty temptation, why set yourself up for it? If the devil's going to come and say, turn stones into bread, why send him out there to be so darn hungry after 40 days of not eating? Kind of doesn't follow what we normally in our culture see as the right pattern. I want to say that there are a few just little broad things here. First of all, let me say that it's interesting that that comes immediately after he has the experience of the Spirit and God saying, "This is my beloved Son," with John the Baptist. It's my experience that very often the worst times of temptation follow rather psychosomatic patterns. You know how it is, you have a fantastic time and then you go on a downer emotionally. Or maybe you're all a great stable lot here and not like me. Now, who of you had that experience? You get a real high. You know, if it gets chronic enough and persistent enough, we have names for it: bipolar, manic depressive, all sorts of wonderful ways to label it, but you're still stuck with it. But most of us, even if we're not clinically got a major problem, we do tend to have that. The higher you go, the deeper you fall kind of thing. And it's after Jesus' incredible call to ministry and anointing of the Spirit that he's driven out into the wilderness into a period of terrible testing. And second, let me say, it's significant to me that Jesus didn't begin to preach till he'd been through the test. This is a test they won't give you in theological seminary. This is a test they won't give you in your ordination to go into the church. The world's way isn't this way at all. But for Jesus, the temptation is the centering of him dealing with whether he's going to follow the ways of this putrefying, pathetic human society or whether he's going to follow the divine path. And he has to sort that out before he starts spruiking about it to anybody. It isn't something he's going to learn along the way. It's preparation. Probably says if you would serve God well, you need to confront the darkest temptations right from the start. Then let me say one other thing on that. It may be true to say also that resistance for temptation is sometimes, not always, but sometimes best enacted in retreat. The great tradition of removing oneself from the distractions of the world to seek God. Now, Jesus goes into the wilderness. He's desperately hungry, and as our friend said before, there is no McDonald's or anything else nearby. And the tempter comes and says, "If you are the Son of God." Now, there doesn't seem to be any hint in the text that the devil is questioning whether Jesus is who Jesus claims to be. It isn't "if you are," ? It's "since you are, this being the case, if this is so, then You have the power. Use it. You're the Son of God. Tell the stones to become bread. So, personal need, opportunity, a good idea, and the power to do it. I mean, that sounds like a decent corporation way to do things. I think that's exactly what we're hearing in and out of the church at present. I think it's going to be a very lonely next 20 or 30 years. I think anybody with a truly prophetic voice about where it's going is going to be right on the margins again. I think the mainstream, even where its growth, has lost the plot. And I sure know what that means after a cancer scare. Because the fastest growing and most indestructible cells are cancer cells. Because its massive growth and its enduring growth doesn't make it safe or healthy growth. Jesus is tempted to start his ministry living on the basis of material values. And I've just listed a few things here. The temptation Jesus has in the wilderness is the temptation to start in his ministry with a focus on resources. I feel like saying, do you hear me? If you don't, it's probably not much use me expounding it. Probably a bit like that silly little thing we have with Harley Davidsons. If I have to tell you why, you wouldn't understand anyway. Resources. I mean, that is the central lie coming from the major economic heart of the world, the United States. If we have the resources, we'll make the war machines to flatten the other coops. All we need is more money for the army and the world is secure. All we need to cure poverty is to have so much riches in our little part of the world that there's plenty to cancel a few debts. And that'll solve the problem. The temptation to think we can live and minister to the world on the basis of material values and not the ultimate values, which may or may not bring prosperity. Secondly, the temptation to think that the kingdom of God can actually be bought by material success. And this assumption has gone through the church like a disease over the last 10 years. That just if you simply know how to get the corporation dollars, the rest will fall into place. We won't worry about what our values are or the personnel involved. Just give us the dollars. And I believe Christian organisations are heading in this direction like a roller coaster down a hill. Third, it's a temptation to be dominated in our own lives by material needs and desires. I'm not talking about what material things you have. I'm talking about what material things have you. And they can be anything. They can be possessions or they can be sensual pleasure. They can be sex. And then let me say, fourthly, the temptation to try and supersede the Word of God and think that we have a better word than the ancient word from the Scriptures. I'll come back to that in a minute. The sixth one is the temptation to use our power to our own ends. You know, one of the saddest things in the history of the church to me is what's happened to the Pentecostals. They're a bunch of crazies. I'm not saying I agree with everything about them. I mean, they started off with the poorest of the poor, black people from the ghettos, and people that were marginalised. And at a time when everything else was segregated, blacks and whites came together and forgot about the colour of their skin way back in the beginning of the century. And I remember when I was a kid, the Pentecostals in our town we regarded as all in great need of a shrink. Now the interesting thing is that in the 50 years there have been dozens and dozens of major surveys done which show that if anything, despite their emotionalism and everything else, the Pentecostals are actually marginally healthier than the Presbyterians. The freedom of emotional expression in religion, far from being a sign they've lost the plot, is probably a safety valve. But you know, those old Penties, you know, they had a favourite verse. Probably almost more than any other verse they would quote to you. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. And I've watched in my lifetime that be subtly changed to. Not by ungodly, unconverted, unspirit-filled power, and then subtly that moves to the point now where everything's about power. And if you're a philosopher, you will know that when Christians all start talking power, and you see all their conferences, you know, power evangelism, power praise, power this, power that, and they think this is a wonderful spiritual response. No, it's a completely worldly response with a bit of Jesus paint over the top. Because that's what started back in the days of Nietzsche, the German man who is sometimes said to be the founding voice that started the Death of God movement in the 60s. Nietzsche despised Jesus. And he despised religion and saw the future of the world to be in the production of people who would become almost super in terms of their ego focus and strength. And he wrote a book entitled The Will to Power. And what's happening in a postmodern world is that Christians are all gone crazy on power, and they stick the Holy Ghost's label on it and everything else, but an awful lot of it's got to do with the fact we feel now divided, insecure, we don't know what to believe anymore in a postmodern world, and so all of a sudden we start saying power, power, power is a psych job on ourselves inside of our religion. It's not the old Pentecostalism anymore. They really believed that. They said, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. And they didn't care a hoot whether the corporations supported them. They didn't want to have their Christian logo passed by McDonald's. But now, you can find all over the place Pentecostal-driven ministries who are so intimately linked with the market forces of the world, you would not believe. And, of course, I don't know where you begin and end with that. You'll see all over America they have spires on just about every church. And they say, $100,000 you can have towards your church building program if you allow your spire to also be a telecommunication link. And you say, well, why not? Get the money from them? Well, could be. I got so disturbed about this the other night, I sat up from 12 o'clock till 3:30 in the morning reading the book of Deuteronomy through again. And it brought me to my knees. Because something like, 20 times God says to the children of Israel, remember. Go back to the past. Remember where you came from. Remember what a bunch of crap you were when God picked you up. Remember that the only reason you've become a nation mighty under God's hand is not because you had any corporation support, not because you had any right logo, and not because you were particularly more smart or nicer than anybody else. There's only one reason you are my special people. It's because I, out of grace, loved you and chose you, and you didn't deserve it. You don't have to prove it. And the day you start giving to somebody else the worship and praise that belongs only to me, you're dead on the vine. There is nothing wrong with taking the treasures of Israel on your journey to the promised land. God provided for them. A whole bunch of goodies from wicked Egypt was given to them as they left to go on their journey. There's everything wrong with allowing the Pharaoh to decide how you run the journey and who leads the show and all those kind of things. Jesus had to sort this out from the start. He had to work out that you can't substitute miracles, wizardry, and stage performance for a cross that was to terminate his life just a few short years afterwards. There was no way around the cross. And folks, there is no way to be a full-orbed human being. There is no way to be fulfilled. There is no way to know the living God. There is no way for us to be healthy in our society other than in the end the denial of everything we chase and the embracing of God's love and grace and forgiveness for us. It can't be got any other way. The second temptation is, I think, better expressed in Luke. Of course, Jesus gave a very clear answer to the devil, remember? He quoted an old book. I've heard of some people of late who say they don't want to read the Bible anymore because it was written by men. Well, I'll tell that to Jesus, folks. Either be Christian or don't be Christian. You're going to be Christian, then I'm afraid you're going to have to quote some men, whether you like it or whether you don't. Because Jesus quoted from the Torah, and he quoted what came through Moses. And for all of his weaknesses and everything else, even men can sometimes be used by God. And he quoted Moses and the Old Testament, and he told the devil that the Scriptures have made it clear you can only worship God. And you mustn't presume to test God. And man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. You can have mountains of bread. You can own the hot bread kitchens of the world. But if you don't know God speaking to you, you're out there alone, folks. You can have all the hype in the world, and I think that's what's happening to a lot of Christians. I think sometimes even worship for some Christians become a total distraction from obedience to God. I mean, I don't hear too many Christians saying, I'm enjoying going to my church because when I went there, I really was taken into the desert, made to confront myself, and I can feel my marching orders from God about how I ought to live and what I should be doing, what I should be. I hear most of them saying, oh, we had a fantastic praise session. It was so beautiful. Hmm? The second temptation that came was the temptation to follow the world's ways, as it were, in another sense. The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world and said, I will give you all their authority and splendor. For it has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. If you worship me, it'll be yours. How many millenniums do we have to have history show us the facts that power and brilliance for all of human history basically belongs to the bad ones, not the good ones? Tell me a time in history where that hasn't been the case. When the church has become powerful itself, it's become a monster. It's perpetrated the most vicious and unbelievable, unspeakable tortures on women. At the drop of a hat, if they looked too pretty, if they dared to challenge the establishment, if a neighbour was spreading some gossip. The times when the church has controlled the world, it's been as bad as the rest of them. It's been as bad as the politics. And it's taken people that have had to stand against the popes and leaders of the world, like Francis of Assisi, to bring us back to the truth again and again and again. Why is it any different in the beginning of the new millennium? Why is it that all of a sudden there's a bunch of preachers around and a bunch of people that think suddenly they've discovered a new thing? I get sick of hearing this business about God is doing a new thing. It's one of these buzzwords in certain circles. Quite frankly, I long for God to do an old thing. That's what Jesus brought them back to, brought the devil back to. The devil looking forward says, this is the strategy. Just be willing to fall in line with me. I'll give you all the resources, the splendor, the stuff that will bring the crowds and fill the church. I will give you all their authority and splendor, for it has been given to me. And I can give it to whoever I want. No wonder he's called the Prince of the Power of the Air. Until Jesus comes back and folds this thing up, there's a sense in which the world's agenda is controlled by Satan. I do love the old saying from, I think, DeHaan, many years ago, and back to the Bible. He said, the devil may be in the saddle, but God is on the throne. And that's the good point. God is really at the point of control of the universe. But the devil's sure riding pretty free, vigilante around. And there is no question that authority and splendor does not and never has and will not until God gives out the final rewards, has never been in the hands of the godly. Authority and splendor in the worldly sense is in the hands of the profane. And the church, too sadly, often behaves in exactly the same political way as the world. Temptation for Jesus, in this case, to use the world's method. I must say to you honestly, as somebody that literally got cancelled from preaching tours around this country back in the 70s. I was to tour at one stage with Oscar Ness on a tour, and I was just so excited about that because Oz was one of my heroes and a great thinker. And 3 or 4 weeks before I was to travel, I was told that I was off the tab because the Christian people concerned that were providing the convention space said that if Smith's on the tag, we won't rent it to you. Now, quite frankly, I love me mates, but to drop me on that basis was appalling. And their hands are not clean either. But the main thing was that it had been heard that I was supporting rock and roll music and saying that Jesus could use rock and roll music in church. And if you were saying that in 1972, that was revolutionary. My problem now is that to exercise the same kind of insights, I have to go at the opposite end of the spectrum, because now what I see is an entire Christian rock and roll subculture that is based on everything that is worldly. It's based purely on preening and cosmetics and on charts as to which is the number one worship song for this week, and on record companies that aren't even Christian whatsoever who own most, the overwhelming majority now of the so-called contemporary Christian music movement. If we can get a good enough stage, if we can shine like the other stars in Hollywood, then we will be able to influence the world for Jesus. Why do we keep falling for it? I'll tell you why, because the devil knows he doesn't even need to bring up any new tricks. The same old 3 tricks have worked, and the only person that ever seems to have been able to permanently resist him is Jesus Christ. But for the rest of humanity, these work very well, thank you very much. The glitz, the glamour, the success will turn anybody's head. And then finally, the devil says, when he calls him, well, it depends which of the accounts you give. Jesus is called to throw himself down, and the angels will take him up to do great exploits, to win the crowd by a terrific performance. Not really very much different. These two temptations are very close to each other. They're all based on human hubris and presumption. They're not based on hearing the word of the Lord. They're not based on spending some time in the desert asking God what you ought to do. At the end of the day, we preachers probably, because we desperately don't want to put people off, we probably aren't as honest as we should be, because 90% of the problems, if we were to look in the face and say, don't come ask me, get down and really ask God and do what God tells you to do and read the old book and find out what the principles of God are, we wouldn't need a fast-growing, top-of-the-town psych department as now the major input of Christian pastoral work. Well, what's this got to do with it? Jesus says, it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. I know what you're going to do with that, folks, but it cuts right across the whole shape of the church in the world today. Serve him only. Now, if you don't like my nuance on this, we'll come up with your own, but whatever, take it seriously. Worship God alone. Don't worship anything else. What's this got to do with Lent? Well, Jesus drew for every response to the devil, guess what? He didn't find a psych textbook or the latest sociological figures. He went back a long way. He didn't say there's a new prophet around, like just a few years ago, that came out with a good quote, Satan, you ought to hear this one. He goes back to the Torah. That part of the Bible that most of us, if we've tried to read it from Genesis to Revelation, quit on. Books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Stuff that our lightweight, pathetic, Western, give me a pleasure, boy, but don't make me have to pay for it. Don't make me have to think. Don't make me have to be on the edge. I want to be loved. Totally out of sync with that kind of world. Jesus goes back to this heavy-duty, detailed stuff that God gave through Moses when they had to quit Egypt and trust God out in the desert. Jesus drew on the tradition. Do you know as well as anybody, as a congregation, that if I got a reputation as a preacher in this country, it was for trying to take the gospel and make it relevant to the outsider. Now everybody wants to be relevant. And I find myself troubled that I don't know if anyone wants to be faithful. Because it's turned, see. It used to be, let's stick to the traditions. We don't want rock and roll in our church. Now it's become, let's have rock and roll. Let's not let anybody think we have even the slightest stench of traditionalism. We are a Gen X church. We are a modern church. Let's not have this stuff. So we lurch from one extreme to the other. At the end of the day, folks, if we are to win in our own personal lives, or if we as church are to do it God's way, it will only be if we pick up this old book, and if it's boring, so be it. If it's hard to read, so be it. If it takes me a year and a half to read it through once, so be it. But man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And this book is our account of God talking. And if you don't read it, you haven't listened to him talking. And if you only listen to preachers instead of reading it yourself, you've heard a second-hand version of what he said up the line. That's always a bit risky, even if it's a reliable friend, isn't it? Second-hand information's never quite as good as getting back to the source. So Jesus quotes the book. And let me say, Jesus drew on the contemplative tradition. He drew on that tradition that says sometimes we have to step right away from the world And if we look stupid, so be it. But we need to get alone with God. And the world says, what you doing that for? That's not cool. And we should say, so? God has been around for a lot longer than you, buddy. I'd rather stick to him. And I know him is not adequate because I know God is not male. I don't know how you get round that. If I say she, the same problem exists anyway. Jesus drew on the biblical tradition. And he didn't just draw on the Bible, he drew on the Bible with a tradition with centuries of learned, godly people who'd helped unpack it. And he spoke inside of that tradition. So I want to say to you today, folks, when we come to Easter, my belief is that while Easter may be a wonderful time to try and reach outsiders, I think maybe Christmas is the better thing for us to use to try and reach the outsider. I think Easter needs to be a bit of a closed shop. I think the days when we sat all night together and really pondered the horror of what it must have meant to the disciples as the one they'd come to believe was going to change the world is taken off to be stripped, politically tortured, lacerated and nailed to a cross. I think right now we need some Easter time retraction from the world. That we might rethink what the gospel really says about the shape of a world where most of us now cannot even extricate ourselves from the evil that we don't even know where our clothes come from, and they're probably most of us here are wearing clothes, my guess is, that were made in sweatshops. Whether it be in California, where they've discovered in recent days people literally in unventilated sheds, actually chained, handcuffed to their machines as Asian illegal immigrants who, if they want to stay in America, have to say yes, sir, to slave owners in California to make the stuff that they strut the catwalk in. For God's sake, folks, at least you've got to feel outraged. Don't give me a postmodern answer that now it's global and we can do nothing about it. If you do, go into the desert and spend some time with Jesus, because pragmatics, outcomes have never been the basis of godly action. The Word of God as to what we should do has always been through the history of the church the basis upon how we behave personally and corporately as a church. So we come to Lent. It's time to remember. It's time to remember that God has spoken into our world. It's time to remember that the compassionate heart in Jesus is not softness or weakness divorced from light and truth. His compassion implies real love and great strength. For Jesus' compassion is struggle, harsh struggle, against forces of evil, lies, hypocrisy, prejudice, which crush the weak, hurt and devalue people, prevent them from growing in love and dignity. It is dangerous to confront a system or an institution embedded in prejudice, locked in fear and dominated by lies. But Jesus does not flee from the conflict. He enters into it, prepared to confront the powerful, to stand up to hypocrisy, to speak with authority, clearly announcing the truth of God without compromise, even if it hurts. Thus he is pushed aside, criticised, hated. The leaders want to kill him. He disturbs many, as we shall see later. He comes to his own, and his own basically do not receive him. And his first struggle is with the spirit of evil, Satan, who tempts him in a desert with powerful means to obtain recognition, to accomplish his mission with ease. And Jesus is clear in his response. Get out of my sight, Satan. You shall do homage to the Lord your God and worship God alone. We need to bring together the strength, my dear friends, of the tradition of this book, of the great tradition for us to take time out where we go and set apart to seek God's face. however stupid that looks to the world. And as I finish this morning, I want to tell you a little story. I believe it illustrates what we're meant to be as the church. It illustrates how important it is that we have some strong traditions that bring us back to thus saith the Lord, that bring us back to getting alone with God, away from the pervasive, iniquitous influence of this materialistic world in which we live. As far as I know, this is my own analogy. I didn't get it from someone else's book, but some years ago we were forced to chop down a magnificent Australian silky oak tree. Glenna coming from Queensland, we had a bit of emotional attachment to it. It was a Queensland tree. I'd grown it from seeds, so it was my special little tree. It didn't come from a nursery, and it had grown to, I don't know, it was about 60 feet, I think. On the margin of our property, it had grown to about 60 feet. The next door neighbour was a lawyer, and he'd issued veiled threats of action against us if we didn't remove it because it was dropping leaves that were going into his swimming pool. Now, this sounds ridiculous. It's all mushy. But I was teary. When my son came in, we got the chainsaw and took it down. I cried over my tree. My son cut it down with the chainsaw while the rest of the family watched and bemoaned its removal. It was almost like a family funeral procession around the tree. Only the stump was left. The silky oak had a beautiful grain timber, so our son, who was working at a sawmill at the time, took wood away and had it planed. He made some tables out of it, and so something enduring and beautiful out of that silky oak wood has been kept. We had a brief argument about the year the tree was planted, and usually when it comes to memory about the past, Glenna is right. On this occasion, she was wrong. She might want to alter that afterwards if you talk to her, but anyway. And then I said, as we had this argument, I can settle this argument once and for all. Look at the stump. Of course, we can count the annual rings of the tree on the remaining stump. Every year has a new ring. Now, a good dendrologist would be able to tell you not only the age of the tree, but it could tell you which years were drought years and which years were, in fact, good years in terms of rainfall. They can tell all of that. The rings of the tree are like a personal biography of that tree. All sorts of information can be gained by an expert from it. Another interesting fact is that, as most of you would know, that if you chop down a tree to the ground, often what you'll find is that branches will shoot up, even if it's a gum tree or whatever. But if you take it up from the ground a bit and you cut maybe 3 or 4 inches wide, a strip around the outside and strip that bark so that no longer does the bark go continually up the tree, that kills the tree. More than cutting it down. You can cut down, the sucker will grow up again. But ring bark it, it's out of here. It's dead. Now, one ring barking of a tree even half an inch thick, the sap can no longer go up the outside and bring the life that keeps the tree alive. And it dies. As I contemplated this, to use a 1960s expression, it blew my mind. I thought, this is an analogy of the church. The majority of the tree is what people would call dead wood. But it's actually the history of the tree. The majority of what people see could be called dead wood. Tradition and process, laws, times you come to church, traditional ceremonies, all that stuff. But without that trunk, without the rings of its history, all that's happened in the past, its tradition, its core, and its fragile creative life on the edge could not stand. And if you're totally committed to postmodernity, and I'm not committed to modernity, if you're into philosophy, because I think every period in the church we live in secular ideas that have got some truth and got some error. I don't think being purely logical, I don't think the scientific method's going to save the world. I agree with my postmodern friends about that. But what a lot of my postmodern friends want to do is to ring bark the tree. They say, we don't want all that dead stuff. We want to reach the outsider with the gospel. We want to be out there feeding the 5,000, but we don't want to be in the desert alone in retreats. We don't want to withdraw to contemplate. We want to activate so we can change the world. Now, that's how tenuous the life of the tree is. That's how tenuous is the life of the church. If one strips the creative margin, the outer edge of the life of the church, then you have something like first century Judaism that's all legalism. And that's deadly. We don't want to be a church that is a dead tree. But the life of the tree is always out of the creative edge. Just when everything looks as though it's accepted, we need to move territory and become radical again and be re-radicalized, so out on the edge we're in touch with what reality is. The life of the tree is always invested in the outer edge, the new growth areas of the tree. No matter how successful yesterday was, no matter what happened to us in 1972, we're dead wood if something creative isn't happening now. We've got to keep the sap flowing. That's why Jesus always worked at the margins, not in the centre. The life was at the margins, always in the teaching and practice of Jesus. That's where the life is. No matter how successful yesterday was, 1 year later it's a dead ring in a tree. But without the dead rings of the tree, you have no history. You have no continuity. The tenuous outer bark cannot exist without the tradition of the Torah, without the Word of God saying, remember. Remember. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Without that truth from the past, without that trunk of the tree, we can be as creative as we like, and before we know where we are, we're totally heretical. We've joined the world, we look like a success, and we've totally abandoned the principles of our God. One can have all the history of the tradition. If it's ring bark, there's no life. But the tragedy is that a lot of us today don't want history. We don't want traditions. We don't want ritual processes. We don't want symbols. We just want a cafe where we can have our coffee and have discussions about Jesus stuff. Doesn't give us sore bums. And doesn't keep us any longer than we want to stick around. Now that's okay if we want to reach the outsider, but what are we? Are we the outsider? Or are we part of the great history of God's invasion of this world? I think as we come to the Lenten season of the Easter Caesar, as you will see in next week's article, it's interesting, the Lord's Supper, which we'll celebrate after some songs of worship, that the Lord's Supper was a closed shop. It was not a party to invite the outsider in. Jesus did that as he walked the roadside, as he healed the people, as he went out and turned the loaves and the fishes into enough to feed a crowd. He did plenty of stuff out there. But there was a day when he said to a few special disciples who meant business, come up this mountain with me alone. There were no pagans hanging around to hear the voice, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. That was a private party. And there are times when we as a church need some private parties, not because we reject the outsider, but because we need to make sure there's a solid trunk on which we can put the living life of the community. That we don't become so innovative that we spin off out there and there's no core to our beliefs, no consistency in our understanding, no solidarity in our relationships, and no obedience in our hearts. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, in this day of the small sound bite, in this day when preachers are increasingly judged by their shortness of discourse, exciting ways of communication, titillating stories. Dear Lord, I pray that you will center your people again on the great truths of the book. Help us to remember what Jesus quoted as he faced the great temptation of his life. That we do not live by bread alone. We are only alive if we're hearing words from the mouth of God. Help us to hear Jesus reply to Satan when he said, the scriptures are clear. You must worship the Lord your God and serve him and nobody else. Help us when we're tempted to think that we can find exciting ways to bypass the principles of the kingdom of God, to hear again the ancient word which says, you must not tempt the Lord your God. Center us this Easter in a deep retreat of our hearts. Strip as much away from us that is necessary for us to find the core of our belief, the heart of the matter, the depth of our consecration to you, because only then will this suffering world know peace, when we walk in your ways. Help us this Easter to embrace the cross and abandon shortcuts to success. Help us to obey and serve the living God. In Jesus' name, amen.